Are there any logistical questions or administrative questions?
Sir, do you know if we will be going back into school in second semester, or is it based on your course?
What do you mean based on my course?
Like, because I know certain programs already are back in school, like, because they're required to be in school, or
Yes.
will all programs be going back into school second semester?
I'm not entirely sure. I know that my courses will be online for the next semester. So some departments will go back or have gone back already, but some departments have not.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And have you been back on campus?
No, I have not yet.
Okay. Do you want to go back?
Yeah, I'm really working to go back.
Okay, good. Yeah, me too. Okay, any other questions? Okay, so let's talk about thinking, intelligence, and if we get a chance, we'll talk about language, but we'll leave that for. I want to focus on thinking and intelligence first and foremost, but language is definitely part and parcel of intelligence, and it can be measured in intelligence scale tests or inventories. Okay, so as you can see, when it comes to thinking, there is an overlap here between, or as you will see very soon, between what we talked about in our first week, when I talked about critical thinking and how it relates to psychological sciences, how it relates to philosophy, and how it relates to scientific thinking. And as you will see, some of that information will be repeated here when we talk about thinking. But before I get to that, do you remember some of the bits from our first lecture on the importance of critical thinking and scientific thinking for psychology or any social science or any scientific inquiry for that matter?
I think we have a course which is called as critical thinking for disciplines.
Yes.
So we are entirely learning almost everything that we can learn from it.
That's good. Yeah, it's very important. Do you remember anything? Do you remember, and perhaps, well, as you're studying in your course, have you studied fallacies?
Oh yeah, sure. Like Stroman fallacies and
Okay.
I mean Steve fallacy and generalization.
Generalizations,
Yeah.
slippery slope. Yes.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, they're all very important to know because why? I mean, when it comes to thinking in general, even before we get into some of the details here, why is it important to practice critical thinking in daily life, regardless whether you're studying something or not? What's the main benefit of studying or learning how to think critically?
Getting 2 points of view.
Okay, or more maybe.
More, yeah.
Okay.
Not like being stereotyped.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so stereotypes are prejudices or biases. Do you have any simple examples that come to mind?
Like all brown people are highly educated.
Okay. Now, why is that? And that would be an example of a stereotype or a prejudice or a bias, that is, or truth. Like, how do we distinguish between the truth or untruth of this claim?
Mm, most of them, but not because the time has been changed and now they're focused on money, how to make money as fast as possible.
Okay.
Um, they think like study is a waste of time.
Oh, okay, okay. So, lack of education. Yeah, they're lacking education. They're not. They're not. They're not as educated on average. That is, the average
Yeah, the
person.
rate has been decreased. Yeah.
Okay. Um, okay. I mean, there are many stereotypes. People, the way we form stereotypes is we take one or two samples, right, and then we generalize over the whole population, right? So, for example, my background is Polish, and some of the stereotypes about Polish people is that we drink a lot of vodka, just like Russians, right? And then maybe because of that, we get rowdy or aggressive or impulsive or irrational, right? And to some extent, that is true. But can you say that about the average Polish person, right? Is the average Polish person, does he or she consume alcohol on a regular basis? Is it vodka? And do they get drunk on a regular basis, right? Now you would have to do you would have to go basically, one by one, and test people. But we know that can't be, based on we can just use our imagination, right, based on other stereotypes, but we would be hard pressed. It would be very difficult to show that that's the case, right? So what happens is that some people have had such experiences in the past, and then they say, oh, or they say, Polish people are drunks, or they say German people are redheads or ginger, or Irish people or German people only eat sausages, right? Or only drink beer, right? These are cultural stereotypes, but they are not necessarily true of the average or every representative from that sample, right? So we make mistakes. We basically, come to conclusions very quickly or readily in order to create thinking shortcuts. Now, sometimes thinking shortcuts or heuristics are quite useful, but they can also get us into a lot of trouble, right? So we have to be mindful about the claims that we make, or we also have to be mindful of the claims that other people make on a regular basis. We have to monitor ourselves, how we speak, and how we categorize and how we think about the world, but not only ourselves, but also the people around us, because we make thinking errors on a regular basis. And it happens to everyone. It happens to me, even though I have been educated for a long time. We all make mistakes on regular basis, sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller. But so that's why we have to be cautious when it comes to biases, prejudices, stereotypes, and other thinking errors or logical mistakes or fallacies, if you will. So here I want to outline just a few, and also in reference to some of the evolutionary pressures that have helped to biologically structure over millions of years specific biases or heuristics that have been useful to us, but that can at the same time get us into a lot of trouble.
Professor, I have a question.
Sure.
Isn't it going to be hard, like being a critical thinker, then having a conclusion, like going into a conclusion?
What do you mean?
Like there will be no conclusion because when you think in a critical way, then it's going to be hard to get the result, isn't it?
No, why?
That's what I found. Um,
Yeah, do you have an example?
not at now, like not now in my
Well,
mind.
look, I mean, if the example of Polish people, right? You know, Polish people
Mm-hmm.
drink vodka just like Russians, right?
Yeah.
Uh, the conclusion is very simple. Based on, based on surveys and empirical studies, it is not true that every average Polish person drinks a lot of vodka or is a drunk. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's a very, it's a simple conclusion. It's not a difficult one, right? It's just not true.
Yeah,
It's a
when you
stereotype.
just being biased, right?
Yeah, exactly. So not, once you understand what a stereotype is and what a bias is and how it's formed,
Mm-hmm.
then you can very quickly argue against it. And the conclusion then is pretty quick.
Okay.
So I wouldn't worry about it as long as we have the tools, as long as we have you or other people have acquired the critical thinking tools. Because when someone says, "Oh, you know, my neighbor is, let's say, Polish or South Asian or whatever, Korean or African, and they do this," so I'm pretty sure every African, Korean, or Polish or South Asian person does that. That's not true. We know from critical thinking that that's not the case, right? It's
Yeah.
just it's a basically quick way of categorizing people for the sake of speed or expedience, as you say, as you worry about, that is. But you know, for the sake of expedience, making quick claims about the world, we risk being wrong. And then when we risk being wrong, we could be making other mistakes that could be even life-threatening, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's the importance of critical thinking, right? Because it helps us weed out mistakes, thinking mistakes, on a regular basis. But it has
Okay.
to be learned, right? You don't acquire it when you're born. It's a
Yeah,
process.
true.
Yeah. So, for example, another simple example is, we can say, if a person wins a Nobel Prize in chemistry or physics or medicine or literature, there must be smart in many different ways. But that's not true. Just because someone wins a Nobel Prize in one field, that doesn't mean they're experts in other fields. They could be actually quite average or dumb in other fields. So to trust an expert to be an expert in all fields is a mistake, is a thinking mistake. And we know this through studying or learning how to think critically, right? Um, and this can be, you can experience this also experientially. That is, this can be tested through different experiences, but also empirically through literature. So um, so that's why that's why there's so much emphasis on critical thinking in sciences, but also not only in sciences, but also in journalism, writing, just in education in general, right? But again, just because critical thinking is important for education, that doesn't mean that all educators are good critical thinkers, right?
Yeah.
Just like, just like all doctors are not all great doctors, just like all lawyers are not great lawyers. We all make mistakes. Specialists also make mistakes. So we need to be on our toes. We need to examine and monitor ourselves and other people.
But having a critical thinking, it's gonna be hard to go for a conclusion.
What do you mean by that exactly?
Like when you have a critical thinking, you're having different points of view, then isn't it gonna be hard for going into a conclusion um,
Yeah, but about what?
about anything?
No, it's not, because I just gave you some examples that it's not. If critical thinking is a process of learning, yeah, at the beginning it's going to be slower, but it's better later on, because actually later on you'll be making better and quicker decisions,
Okay.
right?
It's just about learning the tools,
Yeah,
right
exactly.
tools.
Learning the tools, it takes time, but once you learn them, then you are ahead of other people,
Okay.
because other people uh, other people tend to make the same mistakes again and again and again, right?
Yeah.
So that's the point here. That's the idea here. Okay, so we use, when it comes to thinking, we use concepts on a regular basis. We use trial and error. We use algorithms. We use heuristics and insights to basically get things right, or to know what is wrong, that is, and to navigate through the world. Okay, so simple examples of trial and error when it comes to problem solving in general under the category of thinking, because problem solving is part and parcel of thinking. We engage in many different methods to solve problems. And one of them is trial and error. Another one of them is an algorithm. Yet another one is to follow specific heuristics and to come to an insight, or to experience an insight. So trial and error is very common. We do this on a regular basis. Children do this on a regular basis too. Any examples here that easily come to mind?
I think all of those are included in the critical thinking for discipline, which is our main course. So especially when you're solving questions such as mathematical problems,
Mm-hmm.
and I think you can use all of those at once.
Maybe not at once, at the same time, but you can try them one by one. Yes, yes. I mean, mathematical problems can be definitely, logical problems can be, you can use a trial and error. You try, you fail, you try, you fail, and then, you try for the third time, fourth time, or fifth time, and then you see, okay, now I'm making progress. Now I'm getting things right, right? So look, I mean, like when children are starting to learn how to tie shoelaces, or how to swim, or how to ride a bicycle, or how to learn how to drive. Trial and error. You try at the beginning, you're pretty bad. But then once you put in more practice, you become better and better. And then you become, you have competence, you become an expert, right? And it's no different from working on mathematical problems or writing, right? You write in English or your own language, you write sentences, you speak, and you get better and better. People correct you, you make mistakes, you then correct yourself, and then you become better and better. You become more competent through trial and error, right? So we do this on a regular basis. Doesn't matter what age we are, but kids, you can see with children, young children, the learning curve is pretty steep when it comes to trial and error, because they're basically learning everything anew from day one when they're born. So they experience pain, they fall, and then they learn from that, right? Algorithms, so AI machines use algorithms, but an algorithm is basically just a procedure, how do you open a door, right? Or how do you ride a bicycle? That could also be a procedure. Then that later on you forget, and then you do it automatically, right? And that refers to procedural memory, right? So an algorithm is simple, right? First you do, first step one, then step two, step three, step four, and step five. It's like, how do you turn on a computer? How do you send a text message to a friend, right? There's a specific procedure you follow. And if you don't follow the procedure in its logical form, then you make a mistake. And if you follow the procedure the way it has been designed to yield success, then you succeed, or you get things right, or you arrive at a solution to a problem. Right? And it's also no different in mathematics. In mathematics, there are specific, whether you're doing algebra or calculus, there are specific, formula, there are specific methods you can follow. specific rules, that is, or algorithms in order to arrive, in order to calculate, in order to arrive to solutions. Okay, so we have trial and error. We learn from mistakes. We follow specific rules or algorithms and heuristics. We use heuristic thinking, or automatic thinking, you could say, or unconscious thinking. That's basically, all of these terms are synonymous as a way to get results quickly, to make decisions quickly, to come to a solution as quickly as possible, right? So it's basically a simple thinking strategy that allows one to make judgments and solve problems efficiently or quickly or promptly. Heuristics are speedier but more error prone than algorithms, right? So what are good examples of heuristics, or what's called rules of thumb?
I don't know whether you guys have seen the Planet of the Apes, which is Reboot. If you saw that first episode or first part of that, a Caesar who is a ape just trying to calculate, trying to be, the ape is being calculated its own intelligence by moving some stone among three poles. I think it's called as Hanoi Tower or something like that.
Okay.
So laboratory researchers can calculate how many or how fewest steps that actually he can move stones at certain amount of trials, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the example I can think.
Okay. What about from everyday life? Even something simpler. So heuristic is basically a shortcut. What kind of shortcuts, thinking shortcuts, we use in order to arrive to conclusions or solve solutions to problems? So that we don't have to spend more time. Okay, is a stereotype a heuristic?
Yeah.
Yes, it is, right? Because it allows you to make judgments based on small sample sizes or small representative sizes, right? So if, again, going back to the example of, Polish people drinking vodka or being drunks, right? Then then that means the next Polish person I meet, or the person that I'm supposed to have an appointment with, or I'm meeting in the future, is most likely drinks vodka and is a drunk, right? So it's just a very quick inference, right? Very quick shortcut. You take one or two examples, and then you generalize very quickly over a whole population, right? We do this on regular basis, right? Because it's faster. But it can get us into trouble because it may not necessarily point to the truth, right? So that's a very simple, a very common example. Any other examples from everyday life where we use thinking shortcuts or heuristics?
I think I guess realize something wrong. Oh well, when you when you buy sausage, then you probably have packed one, which is, a lot of sausage were packed in one package. But if one is spoiled, then you don't have to eat all of those entire sausages. So whether you can check it, all of those are spoiled or not. So
Yeah, you can just one example, right?
Yeah.
One sample, is that what you mean?
yeah, just as long as you can taste it one spoiled sausage, then you don't have to try another one and another one. So
Yeah, or like a spoiled egg, right? Or
yeah,
you can say, oh, okay, I'm gonna throw out the whole package, right? I don't have to test all of them. I don't have to do that for the next 5 or 10 minutes, right? I can just, but is that actually true? Does that mean that just because one egg is spoiled or one sausage is spoiled, that all the other eggs or all the other sausages are spoiled? Is that actually true? Can we make that claim?
actually, it depends on which method you are using, I guess.
Well, I mean, so the benefit here is that a heuristic is a quick thinking shortcut. So instead of testing all the eggs or all the sausages, right? Then you experience one bad one, and then you say, oh, okay, the whole package has to go, right? But in order to know whether, for that to be right, you actually have to test every egg and every sausage, right? Because otherwise you can't know. Otherwise you are just making an assumption. So a heuristic is basically an assumption about the world, right? So, if you see smoke, there must be fire. Well, is that actually true? Is there always a logical connection between smoke and fire? Just because there's one rotten egg in a package, that doesn't mean that every egg is rotten, right? That you have to actually test empirically. You have to test it. You have to test every one of them. And so I think that's when Narwin was saying it's slower. Maybe you don't arrive to a conclusion. You can, of course, but here using heuristics or thinking shortcuts is faster, but it's error prone. It's mistake prone. Okay. So now you're throwing out the whole package of eggs because you use one to stereotype over all the other ones, or to generalize over all the other ones, right? So, and we do this on a regular basis, right? Because when it comes to people from different ethnic backgrounds, when it comes to many different instances in our lives, right? We can say, well, you're driving down the road and there's someone in front of you that is making driving mistakes. And some people might say, oh, okay, I'm pretty sure this person is Asian, right? All Asians are bad drivers. And then you get closer and then you look inside who's actually in the car. It might be, a 19-year-old from, I don't know, from Scarborough, right? That has dreads on. Or someone who's, of Jamaican background, right? Or maybe Polish background. And then you say, oops, that's not true, right? So surely there are some people, surely there are bad drivers in all ethnic backgrounds, right? But because we have become used to a specific stereotype, we think that we can use it as a shorthand or a shortcut, to make quick claims about the world, right? So again, or women drivers are worse than men drivers, right? Female drivers are worse than male drivers, right? And that's also a stereotype, right? That's not necessarily true. I'm sure there are some female drivers that are mediocre or bad, but that could be also true for men. Men can also make mistakes on the road, and but again, we use this, about Asians or women or about other people, right? Stereotypes on a regular basis, right? Because they're just shortcuts for thinking, making judgments about the world, so we can navigate more quickly, right? Yeah. So they're useful, right? Because they save us time, but they can be quite dangerous. What about aha moments, insights? Have you had those? When you're working on a problem and then you go to sleep, then 2 days will go by, or maybe a few hours, and you can't, come to a solution. You can't crack the problem, and then all of a sudden, it comes to you, and you have this insight or aha moment. Have you had that experience? It's like, oh yeah, I get it. I know exactly what the answer is. Or when you're doing a test, right? You're doing a test, it could be a multiple choice test or some other test, and you don't know, you're like, okay, you're thinking, then it just pops into your head. It comes to you, right? So that is an example of an insight, or what's called an aha moment, right? So there are many different ways we solve problems, and they're all useful, but they all have drawbacks. So from a neuroscientific perspective, the aha moment is correlated with specific activity in temporal lobes. So you can use fMRI studies or EEG, electroencephalograms. And then if you give people specific problems to solve, you can track the activity, brain activity, while they're doing specific cognitive problems. And you can more or less locate which parts of the brain are more active during aha moments or moments of insight, as opposed to other brain parts. So this is also quite interesting to map the brain, or to correlate specific activities with specific thinking styles or solutions. But we know, as I have mentioned, we face many obstacles to problem solving on a regular basis. And one of the reasons for that is that we have been, from an evolutionary perspective, biological evolutionary perspective, our species and our bodies and our central nervous systems have been selected for specific types of thinking, especially heuristics, especially quick judgments, okay, like stereotyping, and being prejudicial or bias, because it's faster. So and another simple example is, if I go to the forest, or if I'm walking alone and I'm walking through a forest, and I see an animal in the distance, but it's a big animal, and it kind of looks like a bear, or looks like maybe a wolf, or looks like a dangerous animal. I'm not gonna stand there and wait for another minute or two to find out exactly what it is, whether it's a wolf or a bear or a big dog. Human beings get very little information, and we make very quick judgments. Okay, it's time to run. I better run because my life is in danger, right? So that is a heuristic. You can say that's a perceptual, and also at the same time cognitive heuristic. But we use such heuristics on a regular basis because of expedience, in order to save time. And it so happens that our heuristics, or our intuitions, are correct often enough for them to be advantageous to our survival. And that's why we have had them. That's why they have been passed on from generation to generation to generation. Otherwise, if heuristics were not to some extent helpful, for human beings to navigate or to survive, navigate through the world and to survive, then we wouldn't use them today. They wouldn't have survived over many, many years of evolution, okay? But nevertheless, the cost is making errors, okay? Or mistakes, that is. So confirmation bias is a very well-known bias or a heuristic, and it's the tendency to seek evidence for one's ideas more eagerly than evidence against them. Okay, this happens on a regular basis, especially we see this, especially today with when it comes to the topic of vaccines and related topics. Okay, so so here we basically, if let's say someone is basically an anti-vaxxer, he or she will look for evidence that support their position or his or her position, okay? Or someone who believes that vaccines are effective and safe, then he or she will also look for evidence that supports his or her position, okay? But such people do not tend to look for evidence that goes against their own position. Because if that's the case, then it makes them look unreliable or naive or stupid. And we don't want to appear stupid, naive, or unreliable. Therefore, we seek evidence to support our own claims. But this is very dangerous. Why is this dangerous? Why is it dangerous only to look for evidence that confirm our beliefs, as opposed to the opposite, or both? We can take the vaccine example. We can take, the Asian people are bad drivers example. Polish people drink vodka and are drunks, or, I don't know. People from Jamaica are criminals. I mean, I don't know, any any ridiculous stereotype that you can think of.
Saying is, oh, sorry to interrupt, Professor.
That's okay.
Okay, that's cool. So I think it's related to our survival instinct. For example, we just recognize some kind of shadow or feature of an animal which is giant, but it could be some kind of prey that we can actually eat. However, it could be also a predator that can actually eat us as well.
That's right.
So, yeah, so every chance that we try to hunt some animal or try to escape from it based on evidences. However, if you don't think about the evidence that against them, it will be less likely to good for survival, I guess.
Yes, it can definitely save an animal, right? It doesn't mean that the animal, whenever an animal, like human beings or other animals, uses a specific heuristic, is right. But when it is right, it could actually be life-saving. Therefore, the logic of biology here is a given species should use it more often than not, because even with the amount of errors that an animal can make, it can definitely reap benefits from when it is right. So when you consider when it is right, the success rate and the failing rate, it still is in favor of using a heuristic, because it's advantageous for survival, right? So you're right. You're absolutely right. That's what it means. That's the way we look at it from an evolutionary perspective, and it works. Okay. Now, when it comes to when it comes to confirmation bias, when it comes, if people say, well, I see all this information about that the vaccine is dangerous or the vaccine doesn't work. Well, what about all the cases where it is effective and it has saved lives? Why don't people take that into consideration? Okay, they don't, because they don't want to, because they want to maintain a specific bias. Okay, it's a need, it's a desire to hold on to such biases because of other motivations. Okay, it's the same thing with judging people's ability to drive on the road. So all Asian people are bad drivers. Well, what about all the Asian people on the road who are not bad drivers, that are good drivers? Why aren't you? You can say to a person like that, why don't you take that evidence to speak against your claim that all are bad drivers? Okay, so this is basically confirmation bias, right? When people only look for evidence that confirm their claims or positions and disregard or ignore evidence against their positions or claims. Okay. Now, if everyone thought like that, we would make, there wouldn't be progress in science at all. Right? People would say, well, that's enough evidence. I have 2 cases and that's enough evidence. That means everyone reacts in the same way. My father had smoked, not my father, but let's say someone might say, well, my uncle or my father had smoked for 55 years, or they were 85, or they were still smoking and they didn't have any health problems. Therefore, smoking is healthy. Right? What about all the evidence to the contrary, right? You have to take that into account if you want to be accurate about your claims. If you don't want to be accurate about your claims, then you fall prey to confirmation bias. But it's 100% positive that you or someone else will be wrong about their claims, right? Because confirmation bias, that's what it does. That's what it yields. It could yield some success, but it could yield also very dangerous mistakes. Okay. So yes, keep that in mind. And like I said, it's not only the average person that falls prey to confirmation bias, but also experts. And we have to. That's why we, when it comes to science and scientific thinking in general, it is commonplace to share results, to publish results of specific experiments, so that other people can see, can assess it, can test it, can replicate experiments in order to see whether they can be replicated, whether they have been reliable or valid. Okay, that is very important for progress, for scientific progress to take place, but just progress in thinking to take place, not just in scientific fields, but just on daily basis. So some people just fall prey to confirmation bias because, like I said, they don't want to look stupid. They want to be right. They're defending their egos, but they're also afraid of being proven wrong. And there's nothing really, at the end of the day, it's okay to be proven wrong, because that's when we learn, and that's when we actually can garner more respect from other people, that we have humility, that we don't think that we are the smartest people on earth, because most likely we're not. Okay, so that is another reason why it is important to practice critical thinking, or to avoid fallacies such as confirmation bias. Functional fixation, inability to see a problem from a new perspective, right? So just people, looking at problems or situations from one perspective, So, when if you have if there's a functional fixation, you can say, well, when you have an empty bottle of water, sorry, when you have an empty bottle, a plastic bottle or a water bottle, sorry, a glass bottle, you may say, well, you know, I don't really have any other use for it. The only use for it is to carry water. Well, that's not true. You can actually make many different things from a plastic bottle, right? You can make many different, you can create many different uses for a bottle, okay? That no longer has the content that it was meant to carry. So you can get creative with objects, everyday objects. Instead of throwing them out, instead of discarding them, you can reuse them in creative ways. So you can basically avoid a given fixation, functional fixation, that a given object can only be functional for specific reasons and only for specific reasons, and no other reasons or no other problems can be solved with it. Okay, so and human beings get creative and animals get creative, but that requires just stepping out of, you know, a fixed way of thinking. So one way to test this is, you know, how many things, what could you do with a pencil? How many different things could you do with a pencil except to write with it? Or what could you do with a brick apart from building a house with it? Or, you know, what could you do with an unused car tire apart from trying to throw it in the garbage or recycle it if possible? Okay, there are many different, we can come up with many different uses, and that's basically a test for creativity. But a test for creativity as such is also an example of discarding fixations or getting out of typical ways of thinking or fixations. Does this make sense? Okay. So, you know, here's an example. This is a good example that's used in the book, and here it's an example of functional fixation or discarding or getting freeing oneself from functional fixation by solving a problem, a geometrical problem, with you know, building specific shapes. So here, basically, I think the task was to build an object that would include 4 triangles. So yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, you can't do this in a 2-dimensional space, but you can do this in a 3-dimensional space when you stand them up, right? So one object that's composed of 3 types of triangles, the same type of triangles. So now you can actually have 4 triangles in one object. So in order to do this, you need to step out of one thinking box and enter different possibilities. Step out of your fixation, basically. And then it's possible. Then we can come up with creative ways of solving problems. So again, heuristics like intuitions are effortless, immediate, automatic feeling or thought, as contrasted with explicit conscious reasoning. And explicit conscious reasoning will always take more time, will always take more energy. But in some cases, it is much more advisable to do so in order to cut down the number of errors, or in order to maybe save one's life, or make serious thinking mistakes. So when we say things like, I have a gut feeling, what we mean by that is intuition. And we follow our intuitions. And it's not to say that we shouldn't follow our intuitions, because our intuitions can actually be right, but it doesn't mean that all intuitions are right. Sometimes we have an intuition that's based on fear, or that's based on a stereotype, and we commit ourselves to specific decision making that are erroneous. Availability. Here's another fallacy or problem in decision or judgments. And so we have confirmation bias, functional fixation, and here's another one: availability heuristic, judging the likelihood of an event based on its availability in memory. Events that readily come to mind are assumed to be common. Such thinking can distort one's judgments of other people. So, we can say it's a bit of a recency effect when it comes to memory. You judge something to be the case, or you use it in order to make judgments because you remember it better than other things. So you can say things like, oh, yeah, I just saw there was a plane crash on the news. Therefore, flying planes is very dangerous. Well, actually, statistically, flying is the safest way to travel, to commute. Being killed or seriously injured in a car accident is a lot more probable in one's lifetime than dying in a plane crash. But because the available information or most recent information in our minds is of something that we saw on the news, we use it to make very quick judgments. Okay. So again, this is an example of a heuristic that can get us into a lot of trouble. So we have to, in order to make accurate claims, we have to spend a bit more time to find out what research shows, what empirical studies show, whether our heuristic claims are right or wrong, right? And if you look at the stats, let's say, flying versus driving is a lot more dangerous than flying. But I'll come back to that example because there are a few other things that are important when it comes to judging flight or flying in the air as more dangerous than, let's say, driving. Any questions here? Oh, okay. So this is connected to what we call the fear factor. What factors exaggerate our fear of unlikely events? And this brings us back to the flying example, or fear of flying. So many people fear flying more than driving because they're afraid of it. But just because you or someone else is afraid of something, that doesn't mean that your fear is warranted. That doesn't mean that you are afraid for the right reasons, okay? You might be afraid because you have a strong emotional reaction. You might be afraid because you saw something on the news. You might be afraid because an instance of a plane crash took place, it happened to someone in your family members, in your family, or your community, or your colleagues or friends. But that's anecdotal. That is true, but that is only representative of a very small percentage of population. That doesn't mean that you can take this claim, such a claim, based on fear or availability or proximity, someone that's close to you, or recency, something that you remember recently. to speculate or to make claims, accurate claims about all instances. So why do we fear the wrong things? We fear what our ancestral history has prepared us to fear. So for example, many people fear snakes even though they've never interacted with snakes. Or many people may fear spiders, but they've never interacted with spiders. It's enough that they see a spider on TV or in a movie or on a wall, and they have a strong negative reaction. But what is that based on? Are is it based on specific experiences on daily basis? Do spiders come to us and they say, do they harass us on daily basis? Do they bite us on regular basis, or do they kill human beings on regular basis? So you can say that we have been, from an evolutionary perspective, we have been programmed or primed to fear specific animals, but without really evidence for such fear. So it's really unfounded. The other thing is that we fear things that we cannot control. When you are on a plane, you are not in control. When you are in a car, you feel like you are more in control. Therefore, you feel that you are safer. Okay, so that is also part of the reason why people say, or people are afraid of flying, or they claim that flying is lethal. It can be life-ending, right? Or more often life-ending than driving, which is not statistically true at all. Right? So control is a big factor. We fear what is immediate. Okay, so with the case of flying, right? It's a fear that is based on immediate experiences, right? You are flying, sitting basically in the sky in this wonderful machine, right? And you don't have control over it, right? Whereas with other objects or other machines, that is not necessarily the case, right? You can immediately control a car. You can turn, you can stop, you can speed up, you can turn off the engine if you really want to. That's not with the car. That's not the case with the plane, right? You can't go to the pilot and say, excuse me, I'm having an anxiety attack. Could you land this plane for me? Could you park it in my driveway so that maybe later, if I feel confident enough, we'll continue the trip? That's not gonna happen, right? I mean, most likely, you're not gonna fly again. We fear what is most readily available in memory, right? I have just mentioned that. We fear too little, the less dramatic, we fear too little, the less dramatic and ongoing threats that claim lives one by one. So, I mean, it just goes back to what I have said earlier, right? But, car accidents are less dramatic than airplanes. So people downplay car accidents or bicycle accidents because they're less dramatic. They're not on the news as often as, let's say, airplane crashes. So, if we remember something because it was dramatic, then we're going to refer to it or use it in our thinking about the world. But not so when it comes to trivial, mundane events of everyday life. When someone falls off a bicycle, when a child falls off a bicycle, that's not going to make the news, right? Oh, well, children fall off bicycles, adults fall off bicycles and they scrape their knees or they get hurt or they get injured, right? Yeah, but that's just a regular event. There's nothing special, nothing very important about it, right? But with the airplane, right, or with a specific, let's say, car shooting, or there's a shooting or drive-by shooting, which sometimes happens in Toronto, then that makes the news. And sometimes when it happens in specific parts of the city, let's say in Scarborough, because Scarborough has a bad reputation, and then people say, "Oh, see, I told you, Scarborough is dangerous. Never buy a house over there. Never move there. People there are criminals, and you're gonna get shot and get killed." Well, because it was on the news. What about shootings in other parts of the city or outside of the city? Okay, that's a very good example of confirmation bias, right? We look for evidence that confirm our beliefs, our prejudices. So just keep this is important. Keep this in mind, not only for the purposes of writing a test successfully in this class, but just better thinking skills in your own lives. And I guarantee you're going to be more successful and just a happier human being in the future when you do so. And you're most likely going to be respected and revered or liked by other people, more so when you engage in critical thinking on a regular basis. A representativeness heuristic is another example. Judging the likelihood of an event in terms of how well it seems to represent or match a particular prototype. So a prototype is basically a concept, an idea that we use to speak or to communicate to other people, to navigate through the world, right? So, a simple prototype is a chair, right? A chair is something that you sit on, right? And if you want to make it into a functional fixation, you can say, well, a chair is an object that you can only sit on. There's no other things you can do with a chair, right? Well, but when you really think about it, you can actually use a chair for many different things that do not involve sitting, right? You can play with a chair. Children can use a chair for many different reasons. You can use a chair to stand on in order to change a light bulb. I mean, you can throw a chair if you really want to, right? I mean, there are many different things you can do with a chair, but let's get back to this representativeness heuristic. So again, judging the likelihood of an event in terms of how well it seems to represent. So if the example that's used in the book is, if you see, let's consider a person, a short, slim person reading poetry, right? Middle-aged person reading poetry, and they're small in stature, and they're slim, and they're wearing glasses, right? Now, this person is more likely to be an English teacher or a truck driver. What is your prototype concept of such a person? Who comes to mind more easily, the English teacher or a truck driver?
A teacher?
Right. But what is this claim based on?
Based on her outlook?
Okay. Now, do we have empirical evidence that it is more likely the case that teachers will enjoy poetry as opposed to truck drivers?
Yeah.
Yeah, but do you have evidence for this?
Because they study variety of stuff where truck driver don't. Usually they don't read books.
Usually, yeah, but that's an assumption. You don't know that. What if there are 3 million truck drivers? Have you tested all of them? Have you spoken to all of them?
No.
No, right? You don't know. There might be. So first of all, there are a lot more truck drivers than teachers or professors, English professors. So
Yeah.
that already is a disadvantage, right? So what is the what's the representative sample of this prototype or this heuristic, right? And so you would have to actually survey all truck drivers. Well, what if some people, you don't have to be an English teacher to enjoy poetry, right? A truck driver could also enjoy poetry, right? A dentist could enjoy poetry.
Yeah.
Financial advisor could enjoy poetry, right? So it is just here's an example of a particular prototype, a thinking prototype, a concept that a person who wears glasses and enjoys poetry, must be an English teacher, right? But that is not an accurate representation of the general public. That is just a representation of a small percentage of a public or specific people that exist in given population. So this is what we call a representativeness heuristic. We take a prototype or one idea, a concept, and we use it to make judgments about the population at large or specific groups of people.
So is this subject topic that one idea? I mean, you can say some certain type of average. I don't know what that name is, but you can choose some kind of elements among the, in the set, you can choose some kind of elements among those, which is most often appear. But in this case, it seems like a subject perspective according to one's experience, which is most often appears to him or to her, I guess.
Yeah, exactly, right? It's so we think that it's we're here looking for representative, right? Numbers of representative that partake in a given prototype or concept, right? And we think that the prototype that is here, the concept of a person who the English teacher is the person most likely to enjoy reading poetry, right? But not a person who is a truck driver. But that is basically a heuristic, right? We have a bias towards people who look like that and who wear glasses maybe and read such books. But that doesn't mean that such activity cannot be represented by other populations in our communities, right? Or in our by other people in Ontario or in Canada or other countries. Yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it. Overconfidence. This is also quite common, where we make judgment mistakes or mistakes in decision making. The tendency to be more confident than correct. Overestimating the accuracy of one's beliefs and judgments. Now, all of these have adoptive values. All of these can definitely and have improved or strengthened survival of a species. On average, that is, because evolution is about, good enough. It's not about best, but good enough to survive. So if one is always confident, then to some extent he or she will be right or will be wrong, but not often enough to threaten its own position or its life, right? But it could also threaten one's position to the extent where it could be life endangering. So if I'm driving on the highway and I'm confident in my abilities to drive my car, and I drive 200 kilometers an hour and I take a turn, that I have a lot of confidence in my driving abilities, and I have a lot of confidence in the manufacturers of my car, right? That could be the end of my life, being overconfident, right? Because I could say, oh, I've driven 150 or 160 kilometers an hour on this road before, 200, no problem, I'm a good driver. Well, the only way to find out is to test it empirically, right? But the Canadian roads are not designed to drive 200 kilometers an hour. And the ability for an average driver to control a car, if something goes wrong at 200 kilometers an hour, is minuscule, is very, very low. So really, one should not be overconfident in such situations, but we're overconfident on a regular basis. We think that it's going to take us less time to do something. Students think that it's going to take them less time to do an assignment, that they will need less time to study for an assignment or a test. They think that in the future they're more capable and they'll need less time to do specific tasks. And they get in trouble on a regular basis because they are overconfident in their abilities, right? But it's not only it's not representative only of students, but it's just representative of many people everywhere. I mean, on daily basis, whether it's truck drivers or students or teachers or whoever it may be, right? We usually think we are better than we actually are. Okay, and that is a mistake, right? That can get us into a lot of trouble. So, and we also think that the other reason is that we think that confidence is desirable. Some people say, confident people are attractive. Someone's confidence is attractive, right? Yes, to some extent it can be attractive, but on the other hand, it can be stupid, right? Overconfidence it's just stupid, right? And our confidence in other people's confidence can also be quite stupid, right? Because we trust other people, and when they say, oh, don't worry, I know what I'm doing. Okay. Well, I'm actually worried. I just met you. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. It's so playing, being more cautious, especially when we don't know other people, is wiser than fully trusting other people right away, or being confident in other people's confidence when they say that they are confident about their abilities, right? So yeah, it's important to take this into account, especially when you're planning time, when you're thinking about, how quickly you will be able to do something, how well you'll be able to garner resources to complete a task, because most likely you are overestimating your own abilities. And then you find yourself, late and then frustrated and angry at yourself or other people. And I've been there many times myself, and I'm sure you have been there as well. So again, this is just an example, yet another example of a heuristic and failed judgment. Failed judgment call. Okay. So Jen, could you tell me what time it is?
It's like 9:47, I guess, sir.
Oh, okay. All right, let's take a 10-minute break, and then I'll speak about intelligence. All right. All right. So are there any questions in regards to heuristics, intuition, explicit thinking, the importance of critical thinking? As an antidote to, excuse me, to heuristics? Okay, there are a few more examples in the lecture note, but I'll skip ahead a little bit because we're running out of time. The rest you can catch up by reading the book and then also following lecture notes. And if there's still anything unclear, we can catch up next week. Oh no, sorry. Next week is test number 2. Yeah. So if you have any questions, you can always.
From which week?
Next week, November 18th.
No. The test from which week? Like only this week?
Chapters on learning, memory, and today.
Okay.
So week 6, 7, 8. Week 6, 7. Yeah, I think 6, 7, 8, right? But learning, memory, and thinking, language, and decision making. Sorry, thinking, language, and intelligence. Okay, so the word intelligence, or the concept intelligence, is quite popular. We use it on a regular basis. We say things like intelligent, not intelligent, very intelligent, average intelligence, smart, expert, stupid, dumb. We use words like that on a regular basis. Not very smart, or not very. So when someone says intelligence, what comes to mind?
IQ test, I guess.
What's that?
IQ test, sir.
IQ test, yes. And IQ stands for what? It's an acronym.
Intelligence quotient, I guess.
Good. Intelligence quotient, yes. So it's just a simple way of calculating IQ level in children and in adults.
Is it valid for such people who actually overcome the IQ test? I heard that IQ test actually ask you some certain logical questions, such as,
yes,
would you tell me the velocity or how far that goes according to the time, or
yeah, there are different tests.
Yeah, or some kind of logical reasoning, but some physicists or philosophers, logists, mathematicians are the people who earn money who are earning money by doing so. So is it meaningful for them?
Is it meaningful to? Well, I will talk about it in a second, but the quick answer is the intelligence tests were initially designed about 100 years ago in France, to separate kids, to classify children into specific classes, either special classes or regular classes. So educators needed a way to categorize children, and that's where the idea of intelligence test or IQ test was born, for that reason. But then after that, it was picked up by the military, and it was widely used by the military to recruit people into military, and especially in the United States, this was used and has been used and is used to basically recruit people into military. So we have a lot of data. There's a lot of data from children, from adults, and also military on IQ and what it means, how it works, whether it's biased or not, its benefits and drawbacks. Yeah. But intelligence is basically a natural ability. Not only human beings, but other animals have it too. There are many other animals who solve problems on a regular basis, think, count, classify words, objects. Dogs can classify objects. Dogs can distinguish between specific words and whether they relate to balls or dolls or chairs or colors. And ravens problem solve in order to get food, and chimps use tools, and ravens also use tools. And so many animals in the animal kingdom are intelligent, and they exhibit intelligence, especially when they problem solve or interact with other members or human beings. So since human beings are part of the animal kingdom, we also use intelligence, but it's a natural biological ability that we inherit, and then we pass it on to our offspring. So intelligence is highly hereditary, but it's also influenced by the environment. So it's a great topic to talk about from the perspective of nature nurture, but it's, as with other things, intelligence is a result of the nature nurture relationship. So some of the important thinkers when it comes to understanding intelligence from a psychological perspective are people like Gardner and Spearman and a few other researchers that I will mention soon. Now, Spearman thought that we have this fluid or natural intelligence, and then later on, other researchers said, yes, we have a natural ability for expressing intelligence or thinking about ourselves and the world in general, but we also have a crystallized intelligence. So for Spearman, intelligence is the ability to learn from experiences, solve problems, and use knowledge, to adapt to new situations. So it's this general claim about living and problem solving and learning. And he came up with this idea to measure intelligence factor. So he called it the fluid intelligence, or just G, for general, the ability. So it would basically, it defines general intelligence factor that underlies specific mental abilities that are measured by every task on an intelligence test. Mental abilities are similar to physical abilities. So we all engage in physical abilities of various types, and in the same manner, we all engage in various types of intelligence. So it could be intelligence, verbal intelligence, that is the way how we use and how accurately and how well and how fluidly we use language, and spatial reasoning, how we navigate spatially or geographically in our environment, mathematical intelligence, and physical intelligence, how we use our bodies. So when you take all of these combined as a cluster of traits, and to what extent they, in some people, are used more accurately or better or more successfully than others. That is what Spearman means by general intelligence. By basically our ability to use all of these cognitive tricks, if you will, or cognitive abilities to solve problem, learn, and navigate through the world. Sorry. So again, Spearman thought that we have this natural ability, general intelligent abilities, mental abilities. Gardner thought that intelligence can be divided into different subcategories or different types. So intelligence consists of multiple abilities that come in different packages. Okay, so Spearman thought that different abilities, different mental or cognitive abilities can all participate to give rise to this to give rise to natural or general intelligence. They kind of converge or work together as a cluster. And then intelligence can be used for specific problem solving, navigating through the world, learning and passing on knowledge. Whereas Gardner thought, okay, intelligence is not one thing or a cluster of abilities, but it can be divided into different types. So Gardner identifies 8 different types of intelligence. So linguistic intelligence, logical mathematical intelligence, musical intelligence, spatial intelligence, bodily kinesthetic intelligence, intrapersonal intelligence, and interpersonal intelligence. So intrapersonal intelligence is basically the ability to think about one's own self. And then interpersonal intelligence is basically, you can say, social intelligence, or what's called also emotional intelligence. Our ability to relate and understanding others. And intrapersonal is our ability to understand ourselves and to manage ourselves, our mental state and emotional states. So for example, people with savant syndrome who are on the autistic spectrum can exhibit extreme intelligence in one type. So for example, in music, so some children are savants, musical savants, and they take to music very naturally. So if you give them a keyboard, they will learn how to play very quickly. If you expose them to a good teacher, they will pick up very, very quickly, much faster than the teacher himself or herself or any other kids. And they can replicate and play and create music very quickly and quite easily. They have such basically such intelligence, but they fail in simple abstract thinking. They don't have kinesthetic intelligence. They might be very poor in spatial intelligence, maybe navigating or thinking in spatially. And if you give them a map and you ask them to navigate through a terrain with a map abstractly by just looking at the map in order to navigate or to carve out a route where to go, they will not be able to do that. Okay, so such people exhibit extreme intelligence in one field or one type, but they lack intelligence in other types. And interestingly enough, 4 out of 5 savants are male, and many have autism or Asperger's. So 80%, you could say, of the population of savants is male. So you can test this even without going too deeply into literature. You can look at yourself, what are your abilities, intelligent abilities, that is according to Gardner's classification, and you can identify whether there's some merit to Gardner's theory here. So for example, for myself, because I really like sports and I've been playing tennis my whole life, I definitely have the bodily kinesthetic intelligence. Playing sports, many different sports, for me has always come easy. And I've been always able to teach my cousins or my family members, let's say, or other people, if they ever wished, how to play tennis, for example, right? But I don't play any musical instruments, so I'm not very intelligent in that field. I don't paint, so even though I think I have a good spatial intelligence when it comes to navigating through a 3D terrain or map, I can visualize things quite easily, and I use it as an internal map, basically, to help me navigate in an environment. I don't paint, but other people do. Okay, so, and then logical mathematical abilities, I'm about average. I'm not a mathematician, but I've never had great problems with math classes, but I was never the best. I was kind of a B student, a B math student, maybe. So I'm okay in that, but not great. Language use, okay, not bad, but that also comes with experience. So I could say that I'm intelligent in that fashion. So we all have strengths and weaknesses. I have mine and you have yours, but I'm just using myself here as an example to see, to show you that Gardner's theory has merit. Maybe it's not a bulletproof theory or it's the best theory, but it definitely points to something that's that can be observable and measured. What about yourself? Can you point to? Do you find this theory convincing that there are different types of intelligence, and you partake in some of them more successfully than others? Or you exhibit skills, intelligence skills, some more prominently than others? Okay, but you can definitely see, I think this theory is valid in many respects, and even without, like I said, even without going to the literature on intelligence, you can test this theory on yourself and on your group, on your family members, and just people that you know around you, by identifying in which fields they exceed and in which fields they do not, or which types of intelligences. Now, Sternberg is another theorist or a psychologist who proposed a theory of intelligence. He doesn't divide intelligence into 8 different categories or types, but 3. And the 3 are analytical intelligence. So you could say school smarts, use of language, use of grammar, use of mathematics, reading, writing, doing well on tests. So traditional academic problem solving. Creative intelligence, trailblazing smarts, coming up with new creative ideas, or just using creativity on daily basis. Some of us are better at this. For some of us, this comes quite naturally. For others, it does not. Ability to generate novel ideas. So, for example, my mother is quite creative. She's also quite creative with simple objects. And I know that this ability is in her stronger than in other people, or is definitely stronger than in myself. And practical intelligence, street smarts, skill at handling everyday tasks. So again, Sternberg uses 3 general categorizations, not 8. And my question here is, well, is this also valid? I mean, does it yield true? Does it reflect how we understand or experience intelligence on a daily basis? Can you identify any of these from your own experiences? Okay, well, in any case, that's Sternberg's position. And from my experience, not only following the literature, but just from everyday experience, I think this theory is also accurate to some extent, because it captures the different ways human beings can be intelligent. So some people exceed in school smarts, if you want to use such words or concepts, but other people don't. But there might be better at applying creativity or novel ideas, or experimenting with ideas, thinking outside of the box. And some people are quite creative some people are quite good at handling everyday tasks, maybe engaging in typical business affairs on daily basis. Some children are much better at negotiating and playing or managing their time and relationships with other kids. And this could be on the playground or in other circumstances, and this could be identified as street smarts, relating to objects and people without relying on typically what we consider to be school smarts. So when you consider such examples, I think this theory is accurate. Is it bulletproof? Is it the best theory or most comprehensive? That's probably not the case, but it does capture intelligence in some of what we understand intelligence to be in more or less accurate way. Okay, well, what about criticisms of multiple intelligence theories? Research actually shows that there's a general factor, a general intelligence factor that predicts performance on various complex tasks and in various jobs. And there's a specific statistical analysis that you can use to calculate this. So, for example, the aptitude test or SATs or other tests that are used in schools are actually good indicators. So if you give children aptitude tests that are supposed to predict their success in school or in future life, then empirically you see that they actually do. They can be accurate in predicting success in life later on. So that means if there are tests that utilize what Spearman called G intelligence to predict future success, then it's a criticism of multiple intelligence theories, because intelligence seems to be this ability that's composed of sub-disabilities, but can be applied to various tasks or various problems without multiplying it into, or subdividing it into distinct types. Now the other, so this is evident. This is true. So this is evident in the literature, and if you follow the literature, there have been quite a few, or I should say, many experiments conducted on intelligence, and the experiments bear this out. That human beings have this natural capacity, natural ability to solve problems without necessarily subdividing that ability into distinct types. Now, some of the other ingredients for success, apart from intelligence, includes motivation. So yes, some people may exhibit intelligence in some areas more than others, but if they're not motivated to do so, or they don't have the ability to express their intelligence, or they don't exist in specific environments that make it easier or facilitate intelligence, then the expression of a given type of intelligence is not possible, or is thwarted, or it's depressed, downplayed. So, and the same thing for, so abilities are abilities, and then motivation is equally important, because when people may be intelligent or may be capable in some ways, but if they are not motivated to engage, to problem solve, to engage the world, their own lives from the perspective of intelligence and creativity, then intelligence is not enough. Pure ability to be intelligent or problem solve is not enough. So that's a way to criticize the multiple intelligence theories. Researchers also report a 10-year rule for becoming an expert. Expert performers spend about a decade in intense and daily practice, and this is how you, according to some, your intelligence crystallizes. So on one hand, on the other hand, that is, it can be used to support the multiple intelligence theory, because we all have abilities, but then if we we all have different types of intelligence, but in order to develop that intelligence, we need to practice. So it can be used as an argument for and against. If we need to practice for 10 years to become experts, then perhaps our intelligence cannot be as easily subdivided into different categories, because if that were the case, then we wouldn't have to practice so much. Now, since we do have to practice, then perhaps we have this natural intelligence, but then with practice and diligence and perseverance, we chisel out, we become experts. But nevertheless, you can say that we all have different propensities for different types of intelligence or intelligences. But nevertheless, in order to become experts in any of them, we need to put in hard work. Otherwise, we cannot become experts. So emotional intelligence is relatively a new term in psychology. And before it was called social intelligence. And emotional intelligence is basically composed of abilities that fall under perceiving emotions, understanding emotions, managing emotions, and using emotions. So you can see that this will be important for what Gardner talks about intrapersonal intelligence and interpersonal intelligence. So the way we relate to ourselves, the way we manage our psychological energy and on average in our daily lives, that is, and the way we also manage our time and relate to other people. And since we are deeply emotional creatures, it is important if some of us have a better way of managing our emotions or using our emotions or applying our emotions for success as opposed to others, then you can definitely measure emotional intelligence and you can categorize people according to such concepts as emotional intelligence, because some people will be better at it than others, and but there's also a learning curve for many of us. So that means we can all improve, we can be better or worse at using emotional intelligence, whether it's related to intrapersonal elements or factors or interpersonal elements or factors. So here's just a chart, a summary of the different theories. So again, Spearman's appeal to general intelligence. Basic intelligence predicts our ability in many different academic areas. Gardner, multiple intelligence, 8. Sternberg, 3. And emotional intelligence in reference to social intelligence social intelligence, the study and description of social intelligence as it contributes to life successes. So some of you have asked about intelligent tests, and we use them on a regular basis. That is, they're used by psychologists, they're used by educators to help students, to classify students, to place students, to in clinical settings by psychologists, to help patients with various problems. But also to create intelligence tests have also created the ability to, or have helped us to statistically distribute or map out intelligence, how it basically distributes in population. So when you conduct tests, then you can collect data, and then the data yields specific results. And this, the results that it yields is that intelligence can be graphed, can be distributed normally over a normal curve, normal distributional curve, or what's called bell curve. So I will talk about that more in a second, but before I do that, let's talk about the subdivisions in intelligence testing. So we have achievement test, which assess what the person has learned, like a test, typical tests in schools that you have been exposed to for many, many years, and aptitude tests, which predict a person's future performance. So this could be used also in schools, but it could be used in professional settings to predict whether a potential employee would be a good fit for a company or for a job or not, or for a given educational program. So as I said earlier, Alfred Binet was a French psychologist who was tasked with the responsibility to come up with a way to place students in specific classes according to their intelligence or intellectual abilities, or learning and applying knowledge abilities. So he assumed that all children follow the same course of intellectual development, but not at the same rates. Okay, so children, let's say with language acquisition, will start pretty early, 4, 8, 12, and 2 years. And by 2 years, they should be they should be able to use simple words and very simple sentences. But now we know that, so that is the case and generally, but some children move through the process of acquiring and applying language faster than others. So on average, girls exceed in such linguistic development over boys. So girls speak and use language faster and more accurately than boys, but then boys later on catch up. On average, that is. So Binet figured out a way to measure each child's mental age. And then based on that, it helped him classify children into specific classes or programs. So later on, other psychologists adopted Binet's intelligence tests, and they were mainly interested in measuring innate intelligence, that is our pure natural ability to think and apply, to think, learn, and apply knowledge. And then with doing that, he established new standards for various ages. And the scale later on, or the test, and then scale also was named Stanford Binet test. And as you can see, excuse me, it was used mainly in schools. So this is how you generate an IQ score. So you take the mental age of a child, let's say 10. Sorry, you take the mental age of a child based on a test, and then you divide it by its age. And then you multiply it by 100 in order to not to have a decimal. And then that's, so instead of getting 1.25, you multiply it by 100 and you get 125. So, so this is, you know, the contribution. This is a Stern's contribution to Binet and Terman. And Stern was a German psychologist who helped come up with this idea of intelligence quotient. So that's basically what's commonly known as IQ. So if you increase the number here, mental age that is, and you leave it at chronological age of 8 or 6, then that will of course naturally boost the IQ score, and vice versa. So 125 is actually pretty good, and it's one standard deviation to the right of the average. And let me just so here you have the normal distribution graph. Okay, that's a normal distribution, and you can, intelligence statistically distributes normally in this fashion, and but so do other traits like height and other physical traits in population. And according to many of the tests that we have been able to collect and do and collect data from, about 68% of the population falls between 185, IQ of 85, and 115. Excuse me. So that's quite a lot. And then, so this scale, this test has a standard deviation of 15 points. And then as you can see, as you move farther away from the average, which is 68%, which is the bulk, and the average is 100, as you can see, the mean, the percentage of people representative is smaller and smaller. So most of the people are clustered here between 85 and 115, and then smaller percentages as you move to the right or to the left. So as you move to the left, you know, anything below 70 used to be called retardation. Now we call it intellectually challenged and or cognitively challenged. And here we move into very highly intelligent people. Anything north of 140 is a genius. Okay. So and as you can see, 100, you know, the percentage of people with the IQ, with an IQ of 140 is very, very small in society. Okay. So maybe, you know, here 40, I don't know, maybe not even a percentage, maybe 0.8%, maybe 1%, right? Because between 130 and 145, we have 2.5% of society. So scores on aptitude tests tend to form a normal or bell-shaped curve around the average, okay? And then Wechsler is the most, Wechsler tests for intelligence is the most common one, the most popular. And the average in the Wechsler test is 100. So the average child or an adult who has intelligence IQ of 100 will go to regular schools and will graduate. But that, of course, also depends on the environment to some extent and on motivation. Because intelligence is not enough. You have to be motivated to also apply yourself in life to solve problems. And if that's not the case, then intelligence is not the only marker or trait to determine or predict future success. Environment and motivation are equally important. But again, if you have motivation and you have good environment, but there's no intelligence, intelligence falls below 70, let's say, then the chances of succeeding in life is non-existent. It's impossible. Okay, because the way society is structured, we need, to work, to use a computer, you need a special level of intelligence. To use a cell phone, you need intelligence. To read, to write, to engage in mathematical and spatial thinking, all of these tasks require high levels of intelligence. Even working at a fast food place requires quite a bit of intelligence. You're taking orders, you're juggling, you have to be fast, you have to respond to people, you have to take orders, you have to sometimes juggle 2 or 3 things at the same time, you have to interact with other people, right? There's a lot to do, there's a lot to handle, okay? So for people who fall, below 70, IQ of 70, there are very few jobs that I don't think they could, they can exist and they can engage in specific activities, but I highly doubt that they could be employed successfully on a regular basis, even in jobs that are, it's general labor. Even general labor tasks or jobs require a specific level of intelligence, an average level of intelligence. And then other jobs, of course, will require more and more intelligence as you move, right of the bell curve to the right. So as you move right, there are specific professions will come up, like lawyers, doctors, professors, engineers, and so on. Mathematicians, physicists, biologists, chemists, etc., etc., etc. Intelligent entrepreneurs and so on. But because of all of you are in school, it is with 100% certainty that you are definitely in the average. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to go through school. You wouldn't be able to handle tests. You wouldn't be able to handle studying, because studying and writing tests successfully is a difficult thing. So, and the other thing that's important to remember is that tests for intelligence are timed. So the quicker you can work through a problem, the more intelligent you are. Okay. But again, intelligence is not enough. It's how you apply yourself, and the environment also plays a factor. And so intelligence is not necessarily a sole predictor of future success. Other elements or other factors are equally important. So it is important for tests to be valid, and it is important for tests to be reliable. Now, when we say, oh, so sorry, maybe I skipped ahead. Yeah. So with Wechsler's test, there's one for children and there's one for adults. And it also contains non-verbal subtests, or where you have geographical figures, spatial intelligence, logical intelligence that do not use language, or sentences or instructions are not written in a given language. So you can see that from this perspective, intelligence tests are biased, because if you, let's say, if I'm well, I am Polish, but let's say, I come to Canada and I don't speak English, and someone gives me an intelligence test that's written in English, and I try to do it, then I would fail miserably. Therefore, I would get a very low score, right? So this is what we call cultural bias testing. And the only way you could probably test me is to give someone like myself, who, let's say, who doesn't speak English, or that was before when I was a kid, or someone else, tests that utilize logical and mathematical and spatial intelligence, where they don't have to use language or read English language or any language instructions. And so, we can say to some that tests like that can still be biased, but a lot less biased, culturally biased, that is. Right? And such mistakes have been done before, in the United States and other places, where children or other people were given tests, and because they couldn't read the tests, they couldn't do the tests, therefore they would fail them. But that is a strong cultural bias. So such a test would basically yields an overall intelligence score, and separate score for verbal comprehension, perceptual organization, working memory, processing speed. So there are different subtypes of activities or tests within the overall test. There are also tests for memory. So I will, the psychologist would say a few numbers in a given sequence, and you will be required to recall the numbers. Okay, either backwards or forward, and everything on an intelligence test is timed. And the faster and more accurately you go through the tasks, the higher the score you get. But of course, if you're not motivated, or if one feels depressed or unwell, then that inhibits that, prevents really objective testing of an individual. So if someone is intelligent but they're unmotivated to do a test, then they won't do well on it. If someone is intelligent but they're sick, then they won't do well on a test. I mean, it's the same way as someone would not do very well on a typical school test, or multiple choice test, or short answer test, or assignment. So motivations and other abilities and environment play also important roles in determining how intelligence is exhibited and how it is used by individuals. So intelligence tests have to be standardized, they have to be reliable and valid. So standardized, that means they have to be widely tested in a given population, in order for, so let's say if you want to standardize a test that is, let's say, I don't know, Korean, and you want to apply it to Canadian society, then you have to have many people do the tests, so that you have a test data bank, and against which you can compare new tests. So let's say, I'm Canadian, and well, partly I am, and I do the test that was designed in Korea. If I only do the test, and then someone else does the test, then we only have two samples. They can't, we can compare them against each other, but they are not really good representations of what the test says about population, because the test needs to be, that is not enough data to generate valid and accurate comparisons between different test scores. So you need a large sample of tests. And then once you have a large sample of tests, you can use that to locate new tests, new scores within it. Okay, so you need this background of data against which new tests can be categorized accurately, you know, high, low, intermediate, standard deviations, and so on. So that's what's called standardization. And reliability is, a test is reliable if a test gives similar results over time. So if I write an intelligence test now, and then one 6 months later, and then another one 6 months later, and then another one 6 months later, if my average score, if the scores on average are very similar, then that means the test is reliable. If the scores are all over the place, if I do a test and I get a score of 75, and then in the next 6 months I do a test, the same test, and I get a score of 115, and then 6 months after that I get a score of 145, then that is not a reliable, okay, because the scores are just basically all over the place. So that means the test is not, does not reliably test my abilities. Okay, there must be something wrong with the test itself, or the way the test is used. So a test must be reliable. That means so that you can rely on it to yield consistent results. Just like a thermometer for temperature, you know, for weather temperature. If you have a thermometer and but it tells you different temperature, you know, every time you use it, you know, sometimes it's 10 degrees, sometimes it's 35, sometimes it's 85. You don't know what the hell is going on, right? You don't know whether the temperature changes or whether the thermometer changes each time, right? It's inconsistent and unreliable, and you can't use it. It's not practical. Now, the third feature of a good test is validity. So it actually tests what it's designed to test. Okay. So if you use a thermometer to test the speed of cars on a street, then that's not valid, right? The only result that a thermometer will give you is the average temperature on the street, but not the speed of a car. Okay, so if it shows 29 degrees, that doesn't mean it doesn't mean 29 kilometers an hour, right? And in the same way, you can't use a thermometer that is designed to measure temperature in Celsius for temperature that's measured in Fahrenheit. Okay. So you want tests that are standardized, reliable, and also valid. So they actually test what they are meant to test. Okay. Now you may have reliability without validity. Okay, just because a test is reliable, that doesn't mean it's actually valid. It actually tests what it's supposed to test. Okay. So anyway, so these are three important components or features of a good test. And as I've mentioned earlier, you know, the natural distribution of intelligence as it is tested by a specific battery of tests yields scores that are average, low, and scores above average. So a score of 130 is above average, and it's one standard deviation away from the average. Okay, so 130 by 15 points. So you have 100, then you have 115, 130, 145. So the standard deviation is by 15 points. Some scales are, I think, by 20 points, if I'm not mistaken. So anything below 70 is intellectual disability or cognitive, serious cognitive challenge or retardation, as it used to be called. And we don't use that word anymore, but that's what it meant. And highly extreme scores above, above 130. And as I said, about 140 is what we consider to be a genius. Okay, so people who have IQ of 140 and up, or 150 or 60, well, if they get into a schooling system, they will basically, finish university when they're 17 or 18, because they work through the problems so much faster, right? So much faster than myself or yourself. Okay. And I remember when I was studying psychology in Poland, I did some of these tests. We all did in class, intelligence tests. And yeah, most of the students, all students, scored above 115. So it's, according to that sample, it showed that students on average in Poland have above average intelligence. So it means that in order to get into university in Poland, for example, or in other places, you need average to above average intelligence, but not anything lower, because it just, the average person would not be able to cope with the amount of work, cognitive work, that has to be done, and at the same time perform under pressure on tests. Okay, Jen, how are we doing with time? You're my...
It's 11:08 a.m., sir.
11:08?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm just going to say this and close it here for now, end here for now. That is, so in terms of testing disability, intellectual disability has to meet two criteria. One is an intelligence test score, indicating performance that is in the lowest 3% of the population, or about 70 or below, and difficulty adapting to normal demands of independent living, as expressed in three areas or skills: conceptual, social, and practical. So if someone cannot use simple concepts, such as, for example, concepts such as reliable or unreliable, when someone says, oh, you know what, you are unreliable, I don't want to be friends with you. If someone does not understand that, then that is an indication that there might be an intellectual disability involved. Inability to make friends or interact with people on daily basis, social interactions, reading human emotions, engaging in interpersonal relationships, and that usually takes place when people get a job, even a job where general labor is required. But even with general labor, you use quite a bit of, one uses quite a bit of intelligence. So even a simple task like let's say digging a hole in the ground, you have to engage in some sort of planning, right? So you have to have specific tools, you have to know how to apply those tools, or maybe placing an order on a computer, which is even requires even more intelligence. So, or collaborating on a project with someone, social intelligence or emotional intelligence. You have to meet deadlines, you have to plan ahead. Okay, all of that requires quite a bit of intelligence already, even if the task is quite simple. so, you know, conceptually, socially, and practically, you have to exhibit a certain level of cognitive abilities. And if that's not the case, and the tests also vindicate it, show it, then we're dealing with mental retardation or intellectual disability. Any questions? All right, so I leave the rest to you. If there is anything that is still, after going through the readings and the videos and lecture notes, unclear, then I will clarify next time we meet, or you can email me. And your test number 2 is based on learning, memory, and the current chapter on intelligence, language, and thinking, or decision making, or cognition. And it is due for next week. And it's going to have the same format as test number 1.
Sir, I have a question. Be
Sure.
able to stay after class to talk for a bit?
Sure, yes.
All right, thank you.
Yep. Okay, so I will leave it here and let you concentrate on other things. Again, if you have questions, then email me, and if you need to stay longer and ask me something directly, then please do, like Azea. And if not, then I will see you. Oh, well, I won't see you next week because next week you are writing the test, but I will see you in 2 weeks. Okay, so thank you very much, and
Sir.
and take care.
You too.
Bye, sir. Take care.
Hi, sir. So I had emailed you earlier on in the week to reach out and let you know that or these past couple of weeks, I've been struggling mentally with
Okay.
the school. So I'm wondering if there's a certain program or steps I can take to maybe, because I've missed a lot of work. I have. I'm wondering if there's some steps I can take to maybe not even catch up all of it, but catch up on some of the stuff that I have missed this so far.
Okay. So do you have any documentation, like medical documentation, to support your problem?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I would need that. And
Okay.
Yeah, have you missed all of it? Like, have you missed all the evaluations?
Yes, I have. But I'm not even concerned about making up everything I've lost. I'm just the majority of, like, the bulk of what I need, or well, I understand all of it's important, but
Yeah.
like the bulk of what I need to know for the course.
Okay. So I'm just gonna stop recording.